League of Women Voters, sometimes we're stodgy, and that's okay.
Just so you guys know, I am setting up the live for YouTube right now, so it might start going soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it is. All right. Great. All right, so you should have all just heard that audio notification that we're recording, just so you're aware that we are recording. And that is for our purposes to rebroadcast this leading up to the election. And we are approaching that 7 o'clock minute. So while you're all here, I'm just going to say thank you very much for joining and for participating in democracy. We really appreciate it. The voters of Framingham appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us as our moderator. We are going to get started now that it is 7. And so we have Lynn Brodsky here of the League of Women Voters of Winchester. She's a highly experienced moderator, league trained, and we are so grateful for her to participate in our forum here. Thank you to the 2 candidates who have agreed to participate in tonight's forum for the 7th Middlesex race for state representative. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Lynn Brodsky, our moderator for tonight's forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake. Good evening. I'm Lynn Brodsky from the League of Women Voters of Winchester. I am honored to be moderating this candidate forum for the upcoming Democratic primary election for the 7th Middlesex State Representative, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Framingham. The League is a nonpartisan organization for all who wish to encourage informed and active participation in government. This candidate forum is part of our ongoing educational efforts to help voters make informed decisions at the upcoming election. We hope that over the course of this forum, you will learn more about the candidates and what they hope to do for the city of Framingham. This forum is live on Facebook and YouTube. I will now explain the procedures for the forum, which each candidate received ahead of time. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for a closing statement, and 90 seconds to answer each question. At the discretion of the moderator, there may be a 30-second rebuttal time. Opening statements will be done in the order the candidate appears on the ballot. We will alternate the order in which candidates answer each question. Closing statements will be in the reverse order from the opening statement. The timekeeper window will be showing the time electronically. There will be a 15-second warning, and the screen will turn yellow, indicating that you have 15 seconds to finish your answer. Please wrap up when you see the stop sign. If you continue speaking after the stop screen is shown, I will say thank you and move on to the next candidate. And please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking and unmute yourself when you are speaking. Personal references about other candidates are out of order. And please note that we are recording this and will post the unedited recording on our Facebook page and on YouTube. And so for the opening statements, you each have 3 minutes for the opening statements. The candidates are Jack Patrick Lewis and Carlton Phelps. So Mr. Lewis, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. First, thank you, Lynn and Jake, for putting together this forum, and thank you to everyone tuning in at home. I love representing you, the residents of Ashland and Framingham on Beacon Hill, advocating for policies that move our communities and Commonwealth forward, support our families, ensure that our children have the tools to thrive. I've had the opportunity over the last 8 years to meet many of you. Yes, a core responsibility of this position is passing legislation, but I know that this can't be done without connecting with each and every one of you. For me, what this looks like is responding to thousands of your advocacy emails each year and hundreds of your requests for support. It's starting my week every single Monday at the Ashland Senior Center serving lunch, and then heading over to Framingham's Callahan Center to play chair volleyball. It's celebrating new businesses and new Eagle Scouts. It's going to as many musicals and high school and middle school plays I can here in town. And every morning, as I get my coffee, I go outside, I get the paper, and the first thing I do is look through it so that I can celebrate youth athletes and community volunteers. Many of you have probably received these from me. I cut them out, I laminate them, I mail them to you. Few people get the paper anymore. It gives me a chance to know what folks are up to, what's important to people. And so many of you who have kids who have no idea there's these beautiful pictures of them in the paper, I hope you get them in the mail. In 8 years, we've accomplished a lot together because of you have opened up your hearts and opened up your lives to me and my family. You've invited me into the highest and lowest of days. You've shared your dreams with me. Today, I'm going to talk about what we've been able to succeed in doing, but I hope I can gain your support again as I run for re-election. Thank you.
And there was a little limitation of the screen, but you had a little bit more time if you wanted to take it. Are you done? Okay. So just for FYI, they were going to run the 90-second one twice. So Mr. Phelps, you're on for your opening statement.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jake, and League of Women Voters. So I want to say, first of all, hi to Ashlyn Framingham. My name is Carlton Phelps, and I'm running because I want to continue the legacy of the civil rights. As we know, our civil rights are not guaranteed in this country. My dad was one of the first Black doctors out of the civil rights movement. Mom, an English teacher for 30 years. This inspired me to make change. And what I mean by change is we have to be effective. We have to go up to Beacon Hill and advocate for people's, civil rights, for people's, livelihoods, our economy. I believe Jack Lewis is ineffective. And at this point, I also, as I talk to residents, I know that there's a need for change. There's also a need for transparency. In 2021, Jack Lewis voted against public legislation votes being public in committee. 2023, he voted for a $1 billion tax cut. We are down $322 million, according to the Department of Revenue, in our general budget. This excludes the Fair Tax Act that is not allocated towards our general budget in terms of tax collection and revenue. It's time for change. And I feel like I represent that change. And I hear the people. I go out and I listen. I've talked to this community. This isn't about me. This is about we, the people of Massachusetts. And I hope everybody on September 3rd will go out and vote for new leadership. Everybody can read the articles. Everybody sees what's happening on Beacon Hill. We see the bickering. We see the excuses. I'm sure we'll hear a lot of that tonight. But at the end of the day, on September 3rd, we have a chance to make a change. We have a chance to go out there and bring back Beacon Hill to the people and what it means to be, first of all, transparent and also accountable for what you vote for. We want to know bare minimum how our state rep votes.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm looking at the instructions here. We're moving on to the question and answer, and you each have 90 seconds for each question. And it says here that Mr. Lewis, you go first, even though you gave your opening statement first, but we'll all get our turns. So the next question is, what steps will you take to ensure that all of the residents of the 7th Middlesex District, including underrepresented communities, have fair and equitable access to voting? So Mr. Lewis, you're on.
So when I first ran, that was before we had early voting in the Commonwealth. It was before we had mail-in voting in the Commonwealth. This was something I ran on, and this is something I was able to deliver. It didn't happen on day one. I didn't go in and say, we got to do this. And it just happened overnight. It required building coalitions. It required not only working with folks in Ashland and in Framingham, but working with partners across the state to have these conversations. Not what I think needs to happen to make sure more folks have access to the ballot box, but having conversation with folks about what actually prevents them from being able to cast their votes. And what we heard was that sometimes getting to vote on election day is difficult. And when we didn't have no excuse early voting or absentee voting, people weren't able to vote early. And so we changed that. When I first ran, 2,000 people voted in my primary. Already at this point, more than 2 weeks out from our primary, that same number of people have already voted by mail. We know it's working. We're never done. We need to continue having these conversations about what needs to be done to make sure more people can access the ballot. There continue to be conversations about same-day voter registration, something I have always been in favor of, something I've co-sponsored, and something that I have voted in favor of even against the majority of my colleagues. And so democracy doesn't work unless we all get involved, and I am committed to continuing to make it possible for everyone to approach the ballot box and to have their voice be heard.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
So first and foremost, I am an advocate of same-day voting and registration. The biggest thing is awareness. Most people are not aware of who their state representative is in Massachusetts, and that's a fact. And that's the thing. We have one of the least transparent states in the union next to Idaho, and that goes against everything. That goes against our democracy and our ideals. I want to bring awareness. When I go out and I talk to residents in Framingham, and when I go out and I talk to residents in Ashland, I make sure not only am I explaining what I want to do on Beacon Hill, but I make sure they understand what a state representative's job is. You know, that's the thing about our civil rights in this country and in this Commonwealth, is that we have to be able to go out and explain to people their rights, explain what you're trying to do. For most people, just to say state rep, that doesn't mean anything. What exactly is a state rep trying to do? And that awareness allows people to go out and vote, allows people to feel comfortable and to want to. You've got to create that type of atmosphere. And right now, we have leadership that has failed us. We have leadership that continues to collect paychecks and not care about what the people really want and need and their rights. So that's hopefully the answer to your question, Lynn.
Thank you. So, Mr. Phelps, the next question goes first to you. How will you work to increase transparency in state government, and what specific measures would you support to ensure that constituents are fully informed about legislative decisions?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, again, to reiterate, July 2021, Jack Lewis voted for public legislation votes in committee to not be public. I, day one, would vote for it to be public. We bare minimum need to know your state reps' votes. We need to know what you're voting for when they go to committee or not. It doesn't have to be a roll call. That's day one, accountability. We need to know. The second kind of part of your question of what I would do, I would advocate and sponsor any bill that creates transparency, creates accountability. When we talk about the police force right now does not collect all stops data in Massachusetts. This is something that has to change. We need to know how our representation is voting on these things. We need to know that we have a more transparent state. And I believe in the residents of Massachusetts. I believe we all want it. It's just a matter of awareness and getting people out to the ballot box and bringing back Beacon Hill from, like I said, ineffective leadership and from a lack of transparency. The old days are gone. This is new. We're moving towards the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I found in life that complex questions can't be answered in short little sound bites. Transparency has always been a core value in the work I do. Sometimes that's telling a constituent that I see their issue differently, when instead it may have been easier for me to simply smile and nod. Other times it's being honest about the limitations of this job or the likelihood of a bill's passage, knowing that my office may be their last best hope for resolution on an issue. But every email we receive, we respond to it. Every call we get, we answer. We have probably heard from 4,000 or 5,000 constituents over the last 8 years. How do I know this? Is because every November I send handwritten holiday cards to every single one of them. Those who agree with me most of the time, and those who have called me the worst names imaginable that I would never utter in front of my kids. They all get a holiday card. September 3rd, we're going to know if the average voter of Framingham and Ashland actually knows who their state rep is. The average voter knows where to find me. They know I'm out in the community. Nobody has ever hesitated to reach out to my office, grabbing me for a moment at the farmer's market or at the local senior center, because everybody knows that transparency is a guiding principle in the work I do. I don't understand why Mr. Phelps, who has never reached out to my office on anything, including this idea of this narrow understanding of transparency, why he would bring this up and make it the cornerstone of his campaign. If it were so important to him, Why haven't I heard about it in the handful of years since he's lived in the town?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. So the next question is going to be answered by you, Mr. Lewis. With the increasing cost of living in Massachusetts, what policies do you propose to both support small businesses in the district and to ensure your constituents can support their families?
So I moved to the Metro West area about 14 years ago. About 12 years ago, my husband and I bought our home in Framingham. It was the community we wanted to live. We wanted to adopt kids, and it was the community we thought best for them. But to be honest, it was also the only community where we could afford a house. I worked at a church at the time as a minister. He worked for a nonprofit. And Framingham, this one-story ranch here where many of you have actually been in my home, it was the place we could afford. Most of my neighbors are teachers and social workers because Framingham used to be an affordable community. The reality is house prices have went through the roof. There has not been enough starter home, new housing stock that's been developed. So we've been working on this, making sure that Framingham continues to be a community where folks who have been raised here can continue to live here. We have a housing bill that we've recently passed, which is going to spark the production of more housing, especially affordable housing. I've been pushing for ADUs, which now, by right, in our communities, people are going to be able to develop. But housing is complex. It's not just about building more housing. It's about forgiving student debt, something I've been taking the lead on. It's about making sure folks can access a community college for free, something I've taken the lead on, successfully so. It's about raising the minimum wage, something I've taken the lead on successfully doing. We need to make sure that our communities are a place for everyone. Folks who move here and folks who have worked and lived here their whole lives so that they can retire here in Framingham with dignity.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
With all respect to Jack Lewis, who I believe comes from the nonprofit sector, I'm a bank auditor by trade. So understanding the importance and the timing of affordable housing, it's now. Jack Lewis has been the representative for 8 years, and we're in this crisis right now. Massachusetts needs over 200,000 units, and we're slowly getting there. We're not getting there fast enough. When we talk about affordable housing, we need solutions. And those solutions are down payment programs. I worked with Mass Housing at the Federal Home Loan Bank in programs. As an underwriter and auditor, I dealt with every single bank president, every single CFO in New England. And what I learned is we have to have better down payment programs. We have to incentivize developers. We also have to reevaluate how we want to tax real estate. Are we going to tax on the purchase? Are we going to tax on the sale? Whatever we decide, we've got to figure it out soon, because pretty soon, our kids, our grandkids, nobody's going to be able to afford housing all over the state. And this is a multi-level issue. It goes into transportation as well. Do we have adequate transportation, roads, trains, all of it? But the bottom line is, Jack Lewis, with all respect, has been there 8 years, and he hasn't been effective. So let's make a change September 3rd.
Thank you. So the next question, Mr. Phelps, you'll answer first. What is your stance on state funding for public schools, and how do you plan to address disparities in educational resources between different communities in the district?
Thank you. We have to go back to the formula. So Chapter 70 funding is from the state level to our communities. What happens is when we don't adequately have Chapter 70 funding from the state, your housing property taxes go up every year 2.5%, the 2.5 rule. 2.5%, that's inflation, that's CPI, okay? Every year your taxes are gonna go up and up and up. We see what's happening right now in Boston. Just to give you an example, Framingham and Ashland, the budget is about 75% of your budget is based on your property taxes. The rest of it is going to be a lot of Chapter 70 funding that's going to fund schools, but not just schools, also your firefighters, your social workers. All of that goes up every year due to inflation. If the budget comes in flat, right, let alone it's down $322 million, but if it comes in flat, how else can we make it up? There's no way to make it up. So to answer your question, Lynn, we have to go at a different formula for Chapter 70, or we have to reconfigure the formula for Chapter 70 of who gets money and who doesn't. Right now, I believe if you look at the budget, Framingham gets close to about 50% of their budget is made up of Chapter 70 funding. And the thing is, Ashland is a lot lower. Ashland's a lot lower, and we just got to figure out all communities across the state how we're going to change the formula for it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lewis?
So this is definitely where the benefit of not having only been in the legislature for 8 years, but having followed the Massachusetts legislature for 8+ years. We have updated the formula. It was something I ran on. We ultimately passed it in the form of the Student Opportunity Act. It is something that our Senate President, Karen Spilka, has made a cornerstone of her professional career for when she first ran for school committee back in Ashland several decades ago. The Student Opportunity Act has meant that communities like Framingham that have a large number or a growing number of English language learners, people with diverse educational needs, get additional support. 8 years ago, Framingham did not get their fair share in public education money. The reality now, 8 years later, is that Framingham's portion of Chapter 70 public education money from the state has doubled in 8 years. The number of students in Framingham has not doubled. The amount from the state has doubled. I have kids that go to Framingham public schools, one that's going into the middle school, one that's going into the high school. My job before being an elected official and before being a minister and before running a nonprofit was as a dad. And long after I'm no longer doing this work, I will still be a dad. It's the core responsibility I have. And I'm going to keep delivering for my kids, which we've done, and everyone else's kids as well. We're not finished on this, but we have made the changes that Mr. Carlton speaks of.
Okay, thank you. The next question is first for you, Mr. Lewis. How would you address concerns about public safety while also ensuring that law enforcement is held accountable and that community policing initiatives are effective in Framingham?
So 4 years ago, we passed the most robust police reform bill in the country. It was a bill that had many days of debate. Mr. Carlton likes to talk about, Mr. Phelps likes to talk about my votes, especially as they align with the speaker and transparency. The reality is, had he followed those votes, he would know that I forced roll calls on things like limiting the use of tear gas. I forced roll calls on making sure that our local municipalities can't get weapons of war from the military with at least not having the select board or city council approve. I pushed with my colleagues to ban no-knock warrants. We in Framingham had a situation several decades ago where an arrest was attempted to be made, a knock was not made, an awful incident happened, and somebody died. We have to do more. The police in our communities, they work to keep us safe. And we as a Commonwealth also have a responsibility, though, to make sure that bad actors learn or are removed from the line of duty. This was the most important vote I probably have ever taken in my 8 years in the legislature. But we're not over. Framingham's now bringing online body cameras, which are going to change everything, where we're going to get a glimpse into what happens when things go bad and awful things happen. This was a core tenet that I ran on and will continue to be a cornerstone of my work on Beacon Hill.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
So absolutely, this goes back into what I'm saying about Jack Lewis's 2021 vote. We always have to have votes public because we need to know what our representatives are doing. Right now in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the police force do not collect data on all stops. This is why Massachusetts is one of the least transparent states in the union, and we need to change this on September the 3rd. It goes beyond that, though, right? In terms of over-policing certain communities. But to the point, I speak to the police force. I speak to police chiefs here in Ashland and also as Framingham as well. And one thing I do know is that they've made a decision to hire better. They've made actual decisions to make improvements. We know what happened to George Floyd in 2020. We know that situation. We know that our communities can do better. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running. I believe in our civil rights. And I believe that we as a community can work with the police force just as long as we hold our public officials accountable. And the only way we can do that is if our public officials tell us how they're voting. Our public officials do not have the right to hide how they're voting when it comes to everything. including public safety.
Thank you. So the next question goes to you first, Mr. Phelps. What specific actions will you advocate for to address climate change and protect natural resources in Massachusetts, especially within the 7th Middlesex district?
Thank you. So when it comes to climate change, in regards to climate change, net zero, we won't be able to get there overnight. We've got to work towards a green strategy, and that strategy has to be implemented. And within that strategy, we have to also continue to work with developers, builders. We have to work to continue to become a more eco-friendly community, get off of the reliance of fossil fuels. This is very, very important to me and dear to me. I have friends that have worked in the energy space. I understand it. I want us to get there. It's not going to happen overnight. We need to have a strategy. We need to implement the strategy, and it can't be lip service. And that's why I'm running. And on September the 3rd, we're going to change all of this lip service. People say one thing, they vote another way, nothing happens. At the end of this legislation session, they did not do anything when it comes to the environment. All of those bills collapsed in the economic bill, as Jack Lewis knows. And you know why? Why did those conversations collapse? Nobody knows. But I do know in the next session, when I'm hopefully, respectfully, humbly voted in by the people of Framingham, Ashland, I'm gonna put rubber to the road. I'm gonna make things happen, and it won't be any lip service any longer.
Mr. Lewis?
Repeating something over and over again that's factually inaccurate does not make it true. I have made environmental justice a cornerstone of my work from when I ran to every day I was elected. Every session we have passed a major, robust environmental bill. The legislative session is not over. Those who think that what didn't happen on July 31st simply don't understand how the Massachusetts legislature works. I just spoke to the chair of the committee. The conference committee is continuing to debate the final bill. And the final bill we produce that'll happen before the end of this session is going to be stronger than the bill that could have been passed on the last day of formal session on July 31st. We have a roadmap. A couple of years ago, we passed the roadmap to get us to net zero. And every session since then, we have passed new pieces of legislation to get us there. We know the problem, we know where we need to go, and we know what we need to do to get there. So we've invested in offshore wind. We've increased solar production. Framingham has a pilot program for geothermal. One of my priority bills and priority bill of the 66-member Progressive Caucus that I've co-chaired now for 6 years is to allow more of those pilots across our Commonwealth. We're going to continue to make this a priority. We're going to invest in green energy jobs, and we're going to continue to lead the country in this green revolution.
Thank you. So, Mr. Lewis, the next question is for you first. How do you plan to improve access to healthcare services, including mental health care for residents in your district?
Prior to being elected, I served as a minister in a congregation. I left that to help found a nonprofit for LGBTQ plus young people. Supporting youth health and wellness has always been a cornerstone of my work. That's why I've been pushing for things like the Student Opportunity Act to make sure there are more therapists and more counselors in our kids' schools. It's the reason on Beacon Hill I've taken the successful lead in fighting suicide and making sure youth have access to supportive services. It's why the House passed just a couple of weeks ago my priority bill that builds on what Ashland High School has long done, but that which will now require the 988 crisis hotline on all student IDs. When youth don't know where to turn, when adults don't know where to turn, we need to make sure that the resources are available to them. As it relates to healthcare, we need to make sure that we get profit away from people care. We need to make sure our hospitals are strong and that our doctors and pharmaceutical companies work to support the individual and not the bottom line. We've recently passed a maternal health bill. In the last week, after the July 31st deadline that Mr. Phelps spoke about, Bills are still passing. This maternal health bill, which is addressing several issues, including the fact that maternal care and maternal death for women of color is higher than their white counterparts. No one bill is going to change everything, but we're making progress. And if you re-elect me, we're going to continue to make progress on all of these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
So we all see what's happening. Hopefully we all see what's happening with Stewart hospital system and that collapse in the state. I won't put that at the feet of Jack Lewis, but what I will say is that we need new solutions and we need new leadership. Mental health is of the utmost importance to me. My father was one of the first Black doctors out of the civil rights movement. I come from what I would consider a medical family. I understand the importance of access to healthcare. I understand the importance of Black, Latino women, maternal health, all the issues around it. I understand the importance of this in communities, how it affects the economics of communities. There is a direct correlation between healthcare and a strong, robust economy. And we're not seeing a strong, robust economy. And they're all correlated right now. And like I said, I won't put all of that at the feet of Jack Lewis, but I will say that we do need fresh leadership. We do need fresh solutions. We do need fresh ideas. It's not good enough to be in a place for 8 years to say that we're making progress. Of course, we always want to make progress, but at the same time, we need to see the results.
Thank you. So the next question goes first to you, Mr. Phelps. What are your priorities for improving transportation infrastructure in the district, including public transit options and road maintenance?
Thank you. So yes, so when it comes to Chapter 90 funding, working with Mass DOT, we must first and foremost improve the infrastructure when it comes to roads, no potholes, bridges. That's first and foremost. Then as we get into trains, we need more efficient transportation. Massachusetts does not have efficient transportation. Trains don't run often. They don't run on time. Too many delays. We need to upgrade the system. I have solutions that I believe will work to upgrade those solutions, to upgrade the system. And I think that's why we need fresh ideas. We need fresh leadership with fresh ideas, including that. As you look into the city of Boston, you see that more trains are becoming electric. We got to figure out what we want to do, get away from fossil fuels, again, trying to reach that net zero we talk about, and also efficiency. We are one of the least efficient countries in terms of transportation. I could probably name 10 countries that have better, faster bullet train transportation. Why are we behind? We weren't always behind the United States of America, but it starts with your vote. And it starts with leadership, Framingham and Ashland.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Again, this goes back to folks who have actually reached out to my office and asked for things over the years. I received an email from a constituent the other day complaining that the roundabout in South Ashland, the shrubs were too big and they couldn't see over it and they didn't feel safe making a right-hand turn into the roundabout. Got on the phone, those shrubs have been mowed down. The folks who are struggling with the RMV, they call me, I get the issue resolved right away. When I was first elected, all I kept hearing was about every time it rained, Route 9 flooded. I worked with MassDOT, I worked with my legislative partners, and we were able to move that project forward years earlier than initially planned. Maybe it's not as sexy as talking about big picture things, but these are the things my constituents reached out to me about, and I delivered. When it comes to the RTA, our local regional transit authority, we're very fortunate in Metro West. We have new lines, we have electric buses, we now have free busing. I regularly meet with the folks at the MWRTA to talk about new approaches. We sat down once and talked about where people live and where people work, and we made changes to the route because of it. This year, the House Progressive Caucus that I co-chair, the 66 members, we made funding for RTAs and the MBTA a priority. And this year in our budget, we passed historical high levels of new funding for these vital services. We're doing this work. We're going to continue doing this work.
Thank you. So the next question goes to you first, Mr. Lewis. What will you do to protect and advance civil rights for all residents, particularly marginalized groups, in the face of rising concerns about discrimination and inequality?
So prior to being elected, as I said, I ran a nonprofit that I helped found for LGBTQ plus young people. We think that because Massachusetts is the first place that had same-sex marriages, that we somehow arrived on that issue. The reality is we haven't. Over my 8 years, we worked to further non-discrimination protections. On the front of reproductive justice, women in other states are now being forced to leave the states to receive care that they once were able to get within their own states. Young people as well. I'd like to be able to say that 8 years ago that wasn't the case in Massachusetts, but it was. We had to make several changes, bills that I took the lead on. We were able to get across the finish line to making sure that women are supported and can make those healthcare decisions for themselves with their doctors right here in Massachusetts. We've talked a little bit about police reform. We've also talked a little bit about LGBTQ plus issues. Anti-Semitism is also on the rise. In this year's budget, worked with Senate and House colleagues to make sure that we're putting greater requirements on the Department of Secondary Education to make sure that we combat anti-Semitism and bigotry of all forms in our schools. I've taken the lead in making sure that additional grants are made available so that communities that are vulnerable to this kind of hate can get grant funding to make sure they're safe. We shouldn't have to live in a world like this, but because we do, I'm going to keep working to deliver for those communities.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
As someone in this country that has dealt with racism as a Black man, as an African American, it's really a subject that goes to my heart. For me, I've had the fortunate ability to be educated. I believe Jack mentioned President Karen Spilka. I'm on the same page, and you can ask Jack where he is, that we need to retain the MCAS. We need to have standardized testing in this state. You have to be able to graduate with at least minimum a 10th grade reading level. And that's a bare minimum. And the reason I believe that is education will lead to understanding your rights. I want our children, our future, our communities to understand their rights. Things like what we saw with George Floyd should never happen. Anti-Semitism should never happen. Anti-LGBTQ plus should never happen. That's why I'm running. I'm running as someone that has experienced this, experienced bigotry, experienced racism on levels you've never seen. And I'm still believe in this country. I believe in the United States of America, which is why I want to be your representative. And I hope everybody votes September the 3rd.
Thank you. So, Mr. Phelps, the next question goes to you first. With competing demands for state resources, how do you plan to balance the state budget while ensuring that critical services and programs are adequately funded?
Thank you. So in 2023, Jack Lewis voted for $1 billion tax cut. That can't happen. Right now, the state, again, to repeat, is down $322 million according to the Department of Revenue. This is for the general budget in terms of tax collection, excluding the Fair Tax Act. The Fair Tax is income over $1 million taxed at 4%. That has to be specially budgeted for education in terms of gateway cities that would not include Ashland, for example. My point is we have to come and reevaluate how we tax real estate. We just have to figure it out. In this country, I believe 50% of the wealth of all Americans is in their homes. That means affordable housing is not just a problem, it is a crisis. We have to figure it out. We can't do $1 billion tax cut. The $1 billion tax cut that Jack Lewis voted for in 2023 was the first one in 20 years. 20 years, they did $1 billion tax cut. And as a banker, as a bank auditor by trade and underwriter, I understand that can't happen. And if it does happen, I need to know, and when I'm your state representative, hopefully and humbly, I need to know where we're going to get the money from. We've got to pull it from somewhere. So if we're going to do $1 billion tax cuts, we've got to figure out where we're going to get the other money from. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Phelps has brought up this tax cut bill a couple times, so I'm just going to take some time and try to explain it. First of all, in the legislature, nothing happens without collaboration. This was a tax cut that our Democratic governor, our Senate president and speaker, the Boston Globe were pushing. And in that tax cut, our seniors doubled their circuit tax credit. Renters were able to double their tax deduction as renters. People who were first-time home buyers and first-time college graduates who were now in their golden years, because of this tax cut, were able to pass along more of their hard-earned money to their kids. Companies in Massachusetts are now more competitive than they were before. If you talk to companies during these conversations, they would tell you that. If you talk to people who worked for these companies, they are grateful these companies are staying here in Massachusetts. In a democratic process, you as a legislator, me as a legislator, never agree with every word in every bill that's before us. But in this tax cut bill, I voted with 98% of my colleagues. I think only 1 or 2 people voted against this bill because they knew it's what we needed to do to make Massachusetts competitive. We have some tough years right now as it relates to revenue coming in. But many of the taxes that Mr. Phelps is talking about in this tax cut don't even go into the general budget. Capital gains goes to the rainy day fund. Again, this goes back to if you follow this work and if you've done this work, you'll know this.
Thank you. So there are several more questions, but I've been directed that we have 45 minutes total, which means there are just 5 minutes left. So we're going to move on to the closing statements because of the time. And so they're in reverse order of the opening statements. You will have 2 minutes each for closing statements. And Mr. Phelps, you're first for that.
Thank you. I just want to look into the camera and humbly ask Ashlyn Framingham to ask yourself, in 8 years, is your life improved? In 8 years, do you feel like your leadership has been effective? When you read the Globe, when you read articles like Metro West Daily, do you think it's a positive or a negative? Do you feel great about your kids' housing and future and the economy? If the answer is, I don't know or no, I would ask that you humbly vote for me on September the 3rd, Tuesday, September the 3rd. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about results and we're talking about solutions. We need new leadership. We need new solutions. We need to also follow our civil rights and understanding that no longer should we be in a place where leadership is weak. Leadership needs to be strong. It needs to be bold. It needs to take action. We don't need state representatives that vote the majority of the time for whatever the Speaker of the House does, because this is Ashlyn and Framingham. And I ask you that humbly as somebody that has been a pillar in this community and is looking to be your state representative of Ashlyn and Framingham. I ask that you vote on Tuesday, September the 3rd for me. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. I'll answer anything. I'll always be transparent and accountable. And that's the bottom line, is accountability. We need leadership that's accountable and wants to be accountable to you, the people, we the people of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, you have 2 minutes.
Or I think a minute. Is it 2 minutes? Oh, good. We haven't agreed on every vote I've taken or every approach. It would be disingenuous to think that we as a community would ever agree on anything 100% of the time. But over the last 8 years, I have met many of you. Thousands of you have reached out to my office. You know I've got back with you. Any of you who have needed to get a hold of me or wanted to get a hold of me have ran into me at a drama performance, at the farmer's market, or one of the senior centers where I'm literally at like 8 to 12 times a month. What you have shared with me, your hopes and dreams about your family and our Commonwealth's future, have been my guiding star for these last 8 years. And I have delivered. We have protected reproductive rights in healthcare. We've accelerated our transition to renewable energy. We've increased public education funding, supported our community seniors, expanded gun safety laws, and delivered on local projects ranging from new schools to the cleanup of contaminated sites. But this work is far from over. I'm never going to celebrate a win because tomorrow I need to work on what's next before us. I'm endorsed in this race by leaders who are partners in this work, who know that helping me return to Beacon Hill is what is needed to move our values forward. I'm grateful to have the support of so many people in Ashland and Framingham. I'm grateful to for the support of Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, Senate President Karen Spilka, Senator Ed Markey, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, Congressman Jim McGovern, Attorney General Marian Ryan, and Sheriff Peter Katusian. And organizations that know this work is never over: Planned Parenthood, Repro Equity Now, Sierra Club, just to name a few. I ask for your support so that we can continue doing this work together. Please vote on or before Tuesday, September 3rd. Thank you.
So thank you. I'd like to close this forum by thanking both of the candidates for their participation in the democratic process. I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters of Framingham for sponsoring this forum. The recording will be posted on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And remember, the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, September 3rd. For assistance finding your polling location, contact the League of Women Voters of Framingham. And I guess you could probably check with your City of Framingham's website, not sure. You can also apply to vote by mail until 5 p.m. on Monday, August 26th. You can request an absentee ballot in person up until 5 p.m. on Tuesday, August 27th. You can request an absentee ballot if you will be absent from Framingham or Ashland on Election Day, have a physical disability that prevents you from voting at the polling location, or cannot vote at the polls due to a religious belief. Absentee ballots must be received in the town clerk's office by 8 p.m. on September 3rd. Encourage your friends, family, and neighbors to vote. If you know someone who needs a ride to the polls, please take them. And thank you. And remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Your vote makes a difference.